it's a great opportunity to talk about Hep B. Many people are affected by it, and from what I see, could you put the first slide, please? From what I see, most people, when they think about talking about Hep B and advising patients, their reaction goes like this. Next, please. My message is, don't panic. You can make it much easier than it seems. Mostly when I see presentations about hepatitis B, there's long abbreviations and liver enzymes and seroconversions, and you see people's eyes glaze over. And I think it's got to be more simple to make people understand what it's about. So, let's get started. Most of you, I know, come from hepatitis C advisory work and advising patients about that. And so, let's look at hepatitis B through the Hep C lens. Next, please. There are big differences how you can protect yourself against these viruses. What to do when you get a new infection, big difference. If you treat those infections, when you treat them, how you treat them, and what to expect from treatment, another huge difference. And there's also a difference how long you can live with these diseases, because they have some distinctions among themselves too.
Maybe that we do not want to know.
Yes, I know.
Once ahead.
No, I'm joking.
Once ahead. I'm sorry for the massacre on the screen, but this is just to show you blood is the main route of infection for both viruses. And both viral infections may become chronic. As you can see by the numbers here, hepatitis C becomes chronic more often once you get it. Hepatitis B is rarer, but in children, and very little children, especially newborn babies, it goes chronic very often, and then people have an infection for life. And both viruses may cause cirrhosis and liver cancer, and that brings us right back to the point of this meeting, liver transplant, liver cancer. Next, please. Some differences. Hepatitis B is more infectious than hepatitis C and 100 times more infectious than HIV. They actually made surveys about needle stick injuries in clinics, and it's really that extreme. Also, hepatitis B can be transmitted through other bodily fluids like sperm, vaginal fluid, and saliva, depending on how much virus someone has in his blood. And it's much more easy to get at birth, through sex, and through tiny amounts of blood. And this is one reason why in countries such as Asia, there are many infections taking place at birth. The mother doesn't even know she has hepatitis B. The infant gets infected, doesn't know. Usually the immune system doesn't even recognize there's an infection because it's still so new. The immune system probably thinks, oh, this thing belongs to me. And then people grow into adults with it. They don't notice anything, and these are people sometimes who are in the prime of their lives, age 30, just had their first 2 children, and suddenly they get sick, they turn yellow, and go to the hospital with advanced liver cancer. And this can be avoided. And there's a vaccine against hepatitis B, not against C, as you all know. Please go ahead. There's this saying or this belief when you talk with people about hepatitis virus, like, hepatitis C. That's the worst virus, isn't it? Sounds familiar? No? Doesn't sound familiar to you?
Yes.
You're an exception.
Yes.
Yes. So if I talk to friends, they're like, oh, hepatitis C, that's the worst virus, isn't it?
Probably because it's newer,
I
No,
think
but
there has
because
been more
there's no
press about
vaccine.
it.
Because
Yeah,
there's no
there's no
vaccine. I
vaccine.
think that counts a lot.
No,
They can never,
no,
there's
there's
no
more
treatment.
press about it. And there's more hysteria about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, more press.
I'm sorry?
You did it.
I did it, yes.
Yes, you did
Go
it.
ahead.
You can do it.
My message about that is pretty clear. It's not so easy. Both viruses have some traits that may be a bit nicer than the other, or a bit nastier. Please go ahead. First one is hepatitis B really not as bad as Hep C? It depends. Some people can live decades, even a lifetime with these viruses. Some people turn 80 and they never have complications with either virus. Others get really ill. And here the differences begin. Because if a hepatitis really is aggressive and progressive, then just notice the difference of speed. Please go ahead. If hep C progresses, it takes like 15 to 30 years for really serious complications like liver cancer, cirrhosis. If hepatitis B is really aggressive, several trials have shown, look at this number, 5 years. That's how fast it can be if it's really going bad. Again, this is not true for everyone. There are people who live for it for 50, 60 years without complications, but it can be that fast. And for hep C, we usually don't see that. Please go ahead.
But most hep B patients get well, don't they? They have the acute infection before the process.
We'll get to that in a second. The adults usually clear it by themselves, 90%. But
Even more. Yeah.
up to 95 in
Up to
some
95,
cases.
yeah,
It really
okay.
depends who gets
Yeah, yeah.
infected. If you're a bit older and
Yeah, yeah.
already chronically ill, then
No,
the
I know
chances are
children
less
are
than
much
90%.
different thing, but grown-ups, yes.
Another nasty
And
thing.
the opposite is for children.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Another nasty thing about hepatitis B. In hepatitis C, you know, once there is a cirrhosis, there's really a high risk of liver cancer. And that's bad enough. But usually you have to have cirrhosis first, or at least very advanced fibrosis like F3. Then the cancer risk goes up. In hepatitis B, if it's chronic, it can turn up any time during the chronic infection, even without any cirrhosis, without any scarring of the liver at all.
That's key. It's a key message because few people know this point.
Yes.
That you can call directly.
Yes. Still, one disclaimer here, most cancer cases in hepatitis B are in cirrhotic hepatitis B patients. Please go ahead. Oh, that's just the literature. Next slide, please. And another. Yes. Another thing about cure. We just talked about people clearing it spontaneously, which is great. 90% of adults get rid of their infection on their own in the first few months, and then they are immune for life. That's the good news.
Yeah, that's the good news.
That's the good part of the news.
Yes. Thank you.
Let's talk about what cure really means and why some doctors are very awkward when they talk about cure in hep B. If hepatitis C is cured, it usually stays like that because it has no long-term reservoirs. There are some exceptions where it comes back at a very late point. I know several such cases, but usually once you're negative, 6 months after treatment for hep B, it's game over for the virus. It never comes back. You can get AIDS, you can get a chemo, it doesn't come back. It's gone. With cured hepatitis B, it's usually the same. You usually have solved the problem for life. That means this thing is gone. The HBs antigen, the protecting antibodies are there, and the anti-HBC, what that means, we'll get to that later. But there's an exception. If the immune system really goes down, and I mean really goes down, it's severely compromised. We're not talking about, I have a bad immune system, I'm getting lots of colds. I'm talking about a crash of the immune system. Then some remainders of this virus may become active again. And this is where hepatitis B shows its ugliest face. Because these are people who have had hep B when they were 20, then they're 70 years old. They have a different disease. They have a cancer. They get a very aggressive chemo. The doctor didn't check for a past hepatitis B infection. During the chemo, the immune system is down. The virus goes up. The immune system still doesn't notice. After the chemo, the immune system suddenly wakes up and sees, wow, lots of viruses. What do I do? And it starts to burn down liver cells like a maniac. And these can really have very severe consequences. Some people die from acute liver failure within a matter of weeks. And once you're into liver failure, you could try antivirals. It's pretty desperate at that point. And usually, when you let it come that far, it's really, really serious. So that's why I have this image here of the woman. It's like, I won't hurt you anymore without me. I'm gone. I'm cleared. It's not.
The point is, that I think the term cured is very, very strangely used in hepatitis B.
Yeah.
It's confusing for people. When you tell someone with hepatitis B it's cured, I wonder if they really know, if doctors explain to them that, you know,
Yeah.
in case something like what you described happens.
That's the main problem. Actually,
Yes.
that most, I am the very first one who didn't know before, joining ALPA and start researching on hepatitis, because nobody explained me that even though I am anti-HBs positive, I got virus, I cleared the virus of my body, now I have protective antibodies, but still,
Yes.
I'm not actually cured. I still have, those small things inside my liver who are just waiting if some...
For an opportunity.
Yeah, for the opportunity. Yes, yes,
But
you're
Usually
right.
the virus doesn't get the opportunity.
Yeah.
Usually the virus does not get the opportunity.
Yeah.
Most people who clear the Hep B virus are technically cured for life. They won't ever have a problem again. We'll come back to this actually at a later point when it comes to patient advice. But I'll say what I usually tell patients. It's like, congratulations, you're cleared. Very likely the problem is solved for life for you, but please, there's one exception. Please never forget you once had hepatitis B because of this. And I explain it to them. And I also explain because if a doctor knows he's going to give you a chemotherapy and he knows you've had Hep B, he can look at your lab markers and he can decide, in this case, there's still so much immune protection that we just can go ahead. We don't need to do anything. In other cases, you may think like, it's been a long time ago. I'm not sure if this virus won't become active again if we let it. And then he will just give you one extra pill, one of the normal Hep B treatment pills, and that's just enough usually to prevent the virus from even resurfacing. It is necessary. It's not necessary for everyone who does chemo, but in some cases it is. And it's better to ask one time too many than one time too less.
Yeah.
Please.
But what happens with all of us who don't have hepatitis B but have had the vaccination? Is that the same then? Because when you have
No,
hepatitis B...
not at all,
No?
and we will get to this
Okay.
too.
I have another. Just to compare, it's not an easy comparison. It's nothing to do with it. But there are other diseases like varicella zoster. When you have, is it chicken pox when you were a child, and people say, okay, it's gone forever. It's not really true because when you're an adult, then you have shingles.
That's a brilliant example, and it's still, I think, more likely to come back than this one. This is really a rare,
yes.
but
That's why I said it's
evil
not
exception to the rule. Can everybody see? I hope I'm not standing away. Please go ahead. Next question. Does a high viral load make the disease worse? That's a quiz first. Who thinks then that in Hep C it makes the disease worse?
Yes.
Do you think it
C.
makes Hep C?
Yes.
Does it make the disease worse, the
I
high
think
viral
so.
load?
I think so.
One.
The doctors always say no,
Can we
but
have
I
a
think
vote?
so. I
Please.
think yes. Even
Vote.
though
Who
they say
thinks?
no.
The recent research, I think yes.
Yes.
So 3. Okay. Who thinks it doesn't make a difference? Nobody? Come on, the others can't all be neutral. Who thinks the viral load does not make a difference in Hep C? Nobody? Okay, let's go ahead. The current state of knowledge is still, it does not make a difference.
But it does. That's just something I will never believe.
It can progress or not progress no matter how much or how little virus you have in the blood. Doctors don't tell you to calm you down. They don't tell you to say, oh, it's not that bad, it doesn't matter. They just tell you it's unpredictable. And that's the message. You can have millions and millions of Hep C viruses and your liver is still intact. And you can have like 20,000 and be raging cirrhotic. So it doesn't tell you. And there's even an official source for it, which comes next. What about, hang on.
Sorry.
We get away from it.
No, but
No,
sorry.
please go ahead.
I thought that...
As for the comparison, let's go ahead. As for the comparison in hepatitis B, this is clearly different. If you have a lot of hepatitis B viruses, the disease is worse. They tested that in very large groups of patients. And that's the HBV DNA, the most important marker to keep in mind. Here are the sources, by the way, for those who still won't believe that hep C viral load doesn't matter.
Oh, it's very recent.
It's very, very recent.
Yeah.
Again, there's an exception, liver transplant, and there were, for a while, we also thought in HIV co-infection it would matter. Exactly. And he's shaking his head. We thought so in 2009. We used to have that in our materials, like, there are 2 exceptions. There's just one, liver transplant. In HIV, they thought it also made a difference, but they had a very close look at the data again, and then they found, no, it doesn't make it.
Contrary to hep C.
But
No. We're talking about this one. We're talking about hep C. The viral load in hep C does not
But you
make
know-
a difference in HIV co-infection. This is the latest news.
No, I think
But
I'm
that's-
confused with the topic of viral load. But I know the co-infection accelerates,
Both
HIV
diseases.
accelerates, yes.
Both diseases, exactly, yes. But
because there are lots of people with genotype 1 who never get cured in spite of all the treatments.
But
you know.
that's
And
how
they,
resilient the virus is.
all of them have very low viral load, and even though the disease doesn't leave them, they still, after 30 years, have no damage to the liver or very small damage. 1, 2, like that, you know? And whereas...
Tove, you know
Number 3
persons, you know 3 persons, you know 5 persons. They know thousands of persons.
Yes, I know, but
So-
it's still, I still think it's...
Yeah. May I ask you something?
Yes.
I just want to make it clear. So, actually, there are two different things. One is viremia and possibility to clear the virus, and the other is viremia or viral load and progressing the disease. Am I right?
I'm not sure how you read the question.
Yeah, because
things.
because when you have if you have a low viral load of hepatitis C,
Yes.
then the duration of the treatment is shortened.
That's another thing.
Yeah.
The amount of
That's what
makes a big difference for treatment.
Yes, for treatment. Yeah.
But for the progression
For
of
the
the
progression.
disease, they keep looking at it. They keep looking at it, and they still don't see a difference in large groups of people.
No, but
that's
there is a
what I-
difference, you know, of the way you feel, because when you have very, very high viral loads, which I had, you know, really high, I'm talking 50 million, then you feel it, because it's like inside, you know, of your body, you feel it very, it's a huge difference between having 50 million and having 1 million. I know what I'm talking about. So,
I would not exclude this. This is something which goes beyond science. And I know more people like you who say, I felt different, I felt worse before I had my lab test, and then the test confirmed I had more viruses. This is something that officially does not exist yet. Maybe in a few years' time they will say, of course, it influences the symptoms. Right now the status is just, there's no connection. But I've had such reports before. I think some psychology also works in there in some cases, because I've had people who were enthusiastic before they had their results, and then they felt very ill. So I think both things may exist. But what you're describing, I think this is something that really should be explored, because the data for that are lacking. But I think that's just a gut feeling. I think there may be something to it. Please go ahead. So, that's one of the most important messages about hepatitis B, the HBV DNA, the viral load. You need to watch it. And I don't know about your countries, but we made a survey in our country, and many hep B patients didn't even know what a hep B viral load is, what HBV DNA means. And some of their general doctors didn't know either.
Well, I would say that definitely there is a difference between, let's say, west part of Europe and new countries. Yes.
You would
Yes,
you would
I'm
think,
sure
but this
that.
is Germany.
Yeah,
And
I'm
people
sure
would
that,
do this.
because I know that for Croatia,
Yes.
and I'm sure that in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Lithuania, this HBV DNA, most,
not even tested.
no, 95% of people who contact me with hepatitis B, they even don't know that they can do that.
Yes.
They
I
don't
guess
know.
We have
It is
similar numbers.
But Tatiana, that's the same in the UK if you've got the wrong general practitioner.
Yes.
Talking about general practitioner, please.
Yeah.
Well, but it's a big problem.
Yeah.
If you go to a specialist, they will usually
Even-
check. At least in my country, they will.
No.
Oh,
Croatia,
in
no.
Berlin, I met
In
someone
Croatia.
with hepatitis B. They had no idea what their viral load
Yes.
was.
In where?
Nothing. In
Well,
Berlin.
that's
German
representative.
people in Berlin.
Yeah.
Hello, he could have been in our survey then.
Yeah.
Because that exactly matches our experience. So this is one of the most important messages for chronic hep B patients. Not the ones with a fresh infection, but the ones who have it for life. This is the most important marker they should keep looking at. Even if it costs some money, they should try to get it. Please go ahead.
Why it is, why it is so important to know your viral load?
Because the viral load in hepatitis B makes a difference for your risk of cirrhosis and liver cancer, especially liver cancer. The higher the viral load, the higher the risk of liver cancer in hep B.
Okay, and because here in Croatia we have guidelines.
Yes.
If your viral load is lower than,
This makes sense.
yes, you don't have you don't have to be treated. If
Yes.
it is lower than, it's
Yes.
I think 2,000
Yes.
units
Yes.
or 10,000
Yes, and that
copies,
makes perfect
something
sense.
like that.
Because
That's in our guidelines.
2,000 units, that's exactly the number they had in this so-called GEN trial. GEN was the main investigator. They looked at thousands of patients, and those who were above that threshold of 2,000 units had an increased risk of liver cancer. And the higher the viral load, the higher the risk of liver cancer. So there's a reason why
Is
the
that,
Croatian
is that,
guidelines-
is that in German guidelines?
Absolutely, and we get to that. Treatment is really different from hep C treatment. Different drugs,
Sorry.
different goals. Andrew,
I think it's very important that it's not just about treatment, but it's also about informing people about their lifestyle choices and the other things that
Yes,
will affect the
absolutely.
liver.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. Different drugs, different goals. In hepatitis C, the goal is to get rid of the virus, to cure it, to eliminate it. The aim to prevent liver cirrhosis and liver cancer is the same in hepatitis B, but the aim is a bit more modest. It's about controlling the virus so that it doesn't hurt you too much. We still cannot really get rid of it. We can get close, but not really get rid of it. The drugs are a bit different. You see PEG interferon may be given for both. Hep C is still the backbone, and there's still little choice for Hep C, which is going to change with all the new drugs that are coming. In Hep B, you either have interferon treatment for some selected patient groups who really benefit from interferon. It's not for every B patient, but for someone who has a very certain genotype A, high liver enzymes, not so high viral load.
Did you
These are
say
the
A?
ones.
Or A?
A. They
yes.
have like the alphabet.
Yes.
These are the ones who really have a big chance of getting control with PEG interferon. Many others, especially people who have advanced cirrhosis, they cannot take interferon. It would be a very bad idea in Hep B. It can decompensate and get you straight to liver failure. But you have other choices, and these are all tablets or pills you can take daily, and usually most of them also work in advanced liver disease, but that's long-term treatment. Please, next slide. This is something that I saw 2 years ago at the ASLD Congress. I really liked that comparison. Just look at the red bits, parts of the virus, and how deep they go into the cell. This one, the CCC DNA of the B virus, already moves into the liver cell, and it sits there. No matter if you cure the virus or not, it sits there forever. And that's the one. That's the one you have to blame if it ever comes back. In Hep C, you see, it's not that far in. And it doesn't create any long-term reservoirs in the body. And smart as the Hep C virus is in tricking the immune system and everything, and tricking the vaccines, it's very smart when it comes to that. But thank God, it's pretty dumb when it comes to digging in deep enough. We can get to this virus at any stage when it's being reformed, when it's creating new copies. We can block it at any time. This one is like a cradle of evil little babies, and you don't get to it. You only can get to the virus when it gets out of the cell.
I don't understand your hepatitis C. Viral RNA, where is it located here? Is it in the nucleus yet or not?
No,
it's not in the nucleus.
So it's in the cell? It's in the cell?
Yeah, it's in the cell, but not in the...
This is not in the running block.
Exactly.
Cell, okay.
Oh, and this one, this is actually a mistake. This should be here.
Yes.
It's moved. This really rising itself into the DNA.
Because
that's a part one mistake. This will be fixed before I send it out. So this one really writes itself into the DNA, and this is why HIV is still far from being possible to cure. Let's not talk about the well-being patient. There's always that one exception. So let's go ahead. What to do with a fresh infection when it's new? In hepatitis C, the main message is you usually try to treat it fast to prevent it from becoming chronic. Because if you don't, most infections do become chronic. If someone has stronger symptoms, it may be a sign, okay, the immune system is fighting, maybe we can wait another 1, 2, 3 months, but then at the latest you should start treatment, and then treatment is still very easy and very, very efficient with just one drug.
So what is the treatment? Because I never knew.
Just take interferon.
Just interferon. Okay. And for how long?
Half a year, even in genotype 1. In a fresh infection, that's usually enough. This waiting thing is a bit tricky. They showed that at the last Congress. If someone has no symptoms at all, it's usually a better idea to treat fast, because the immune system does not even seem to be responding. If someone is symptomatic, they tried something at the medical school of Hanover who are very far advanced, especially in the acute Hep C treatment. And what I got out of the presentation was, it's not only a medical problem, but if you send patients away and say, oh, we don't need to treat you now, some just get lost to follow-up. They don't return in time. They come back 1 year later, and then it's already chronic. So it's a decision to wait, but then the doctor should really keep the patient close at hand and watch and treat in time. Now let's get to Hep B. Next, please. In most cases, you do it the exact opposite. You don't treat. You don't give any pills. You wait. Why? Because in the first months of infection, the human immune system is the best drug you have. It's the sharpest weapon. And of course, you let the sharpest weapon go first. You can take pills on top of it, and it makes no difference at all. So if someone calls you and really worried, I just got infected, my doctor doesn't want to give me pills, you can say, well, your doctor has a reason for it, because it does not increase your chance of cure. Let your immune system do its job. You can take as many pills as you want, it will not make a difference at all. And there have even been assumptions, I don't believe it, because it was minimal differences. Maybe you can even distract the immune system from doing its job if you give drugs too early. So just let the immune system fight in the first 6 months, because most infections are self-limiting. They go away on their own, 90%, and they're gone. And there's just one exception: if someone has a really serious acute hepatitis where he's threatened of liver failure. We had that yesterday in the transplant presentation. In those cases, it can make sense to lower the viral load just to soften the immune system to tell them, hey, there's not so many viruses, don't overreact, don't burn down your own liver. So let's go ahead. Different treatments, different problems. Next, please. In Hep C, very familiar, the side effects are the number one problem. this is just a very short list. You know, if we start a whole list of side effects, we could go on for several slides. And peg interferon and ribavirin are still a part of the treatment. We're still not getting rid of it. In 2012, we hope we will have the first interferon-free treatments in the next 2 to 3 years. Let's wait for that. And resistance was not a problem earlier when we just had interferon and ribavirin. Now, when we add the new antivirus to it, it's something new. We do have resistant hep C viruses, and it's something we need to deal with. For hep B, next please. Resistance is an old, familiar thing. Main problem, as I see it, is people need to take long-term treatment. It's very monotonous, it's very boring, and it's so easy to start forgetting your pill. I know that for myself. I'm not a patient myself, but if I have to take something for a skin infection or for whatever, for 10 days, think of a pill twice a day, I struggle with that. I start forgetting pills. And it's even harder for people who are on it for years and years. And there's a risk that the disease may become active again after the end of treatment. On the other hand, if you take pills, there's not such a big problem with side effects, unless people take interferon. Next slide, please. As I promised, I try to make this very simple. And many principles in Hep B follow the principle of 1, 2, 3. You need 3 vaccinations. You need 3 viral markers to know what kind of patient do you have when they call you. And there are 3 main important factors that help doctors decide should this patient have treatment or not. Next, please. Let's start with the vaccine. So the first one comes on the first day, the first syringe, usually in the upper arm. The second comes about 1 month later. Usually after the second dose, people begin to have some kind of protection. But usually you should complete the whole thing before you really consider yourself protected. And 6 months after the first dose, you get the third one. And for most people, that's really making the thing very solid and really creates immunization. In some people, it doesn't work. This is something that many people don't know. 90% it usually works. In some people who are overweight, older than 40s, who smoke or are chronically ill, they do not respond as often to the vaccine. So it really makes sense, especially for them, because they are at most risk if they have an added Hep B infection. It makes sense to test in your blood, did it work? Do I have protective antibodies? And you see 100 units, that's like the lower limit. You should have achieved that. When you have that, you're protected. If it's lower, consider doing more vaccinations until you have enough protection.
I think our Nadine is one of the people in the vaccination didn't work. And I would just add that there are some countries with other protocols. They have 4 doses of vaccination. I know that it is not 0, 1, 6 months, but there are differences.
4 is possible. 4 is possible in some cases.
Yes, there are some differences. I know for sure.
I can tell you that this is the rule in our country.
In Croatia,
that's very interesting. How about
Croatia?
So what you say we should go on test? Because I've made the vaccine 3 times like that. And should
It
we
would be good
test
to test if your viral load is.
okay.
It's optional.
I mean,
Even in Germany, doctors usually don't do it. They don't even know.
No, they don't do it in Sweden. Nobody
If
ever.
I have a liver disease and I wanted to protect myself from another big threat to my liver, I would pay the doctor to do this little test after that. I would pay out of my own pocket. I would want to know.
Andrew? Any question?
No, I'm just agreeing. But I think it's really important that people with other liver diseases are given that information and offered the vaccine as soon as possible.
Very important point. Especially people who already have a liver disease should get protected against Hep B, because it can make any liver disease worse, no matter if it's Hep C, if it's hemochromatosis, alcoholic liver disease. It's really
in Sweden, they normally do the A and B vaccine together, the same.
There is something else. You mentioned chronically ill, so of course there's HIV, chronic diseases, other chronic diseases that they have.
Yes.
But also people don't think about diabetes, all these
Dialysis.
things. Yeah, dialysis, for instance, etc. And people should know this as well, as Andrew was saying.
Just an extra information, especially for, I think, dialysis patients who also have a very weak immune system, there are supposed to be some very high-dose vaccines that can still create immunity. I don't know what they are called, but there are options. If the normal vaccine doesn't work, get yourself informed for more options. And you might still be able to create immunity with the next attempt or with a higher dose.
Doctors explained to me that even 10 and more
Yes.
would be enough. Yes,
Oh.
but 100 is
Usually you would say that you should be
is
above
more,
100.
yeah.
If you go below 10, then doctors actually argue. Should you
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it again?
yeah, okay.
Shouldn't you?
Okay.
And even in my office,
Yeah.
I and a colleague of mine had the same situation. Our antibody titers went down. I instantly went to have another vaccine. I just wanted to be on the safe side. My colleague said, well, I believe those who think that immunity still is somewhere hidden out there. So it's up to you what you want to do.
Yeah.
If I was in your skin, I think I would play it as safe as I can. But that's really a personal.
Because I'm never, in my routine checkups, I'm being checked for everything, Hep C for instance, but I'm not being checked for Hep B because he considers that as I had it in the 80s, there's no need to do it again. So that's why I'm asking.
But maybe it would be good
Yeah.
to check your protective antibodies.
Yes.
And about booster dose, is it coming later or?
Yes, more or less.
I had a comment.
That's like pre-vaccine.
It's about
sorry.
the word vaccination. You earlier mentioned the lost to follow-up issue with some doctors, when somebody, might leave the care system because, when you say to someone, you will get vaccinations, you will get immunization, I know you're using this to explain that it's 3 doses, that if you don't go through the 3 doses, you are not vaccinated. That's very clear in your slide. But for me, it's difficult when I see people coming to explain that. I rather tell them the vaccination is a process of 3 doses, and if you don't go up to 3 or 4 in some cases, then you are not
It's
vaccinated.
likely not enough.
So this is a way to keep them, safe.
That's
Don't.
kind of wording.
Yeah.
Good comment. By the way, we might have a time problem. It's very
sorry.
important questions, but there's more things to come, especially diagnosis, and that's going to get deep into the scary, difficult part, made easy. So let's go ahead. Do you get infected by the vaccine? The simple answer is no, you don't. There are not any viruses, not living or dead, in the vaccine. And the normal passive vaccine that you usually get only contains the isolated skin of the virus that has been harvested in a laboratory. So there's never been a functioning virus connected to it. And the active vaccine, that's only for emergencies. We'll get to that in the next slide. That's only with antibodies of healthy vaccinated people. Next slide, please. This is the emergency vaccination. Next, please. If someone calls you and says, I think I might have been exposed to the virus today, I just had unprotected intercourse with someone and then they told me they have Hep B. Or I'm working in a hospital and I just injured myself with a needle that I gave a Hep B patient. And oops, I'm not injured. I'm not vaccinated. Usually someone who works in a hospital should be vaccinated, but no, many aren't. Or someone didn't think when they got their new tattoo or piercing and they thought it didn't really look hygienic. Then you have this kind of emergency vaccination. That's not just the normal vaccine that teaches your body to build up a defense, but that also has antibodies. That's like the elite fast team that gets sent in to kill any viruses that are there. And that usually stops any infection, but you need to be fast about it. So if you are thinking you may be at risk of just having been infected and you're not vaccinated, see a doctor or clinic fast and ask for the post-exposure prophylaxis. 2 vaccines, they can stop a potentially severe infection. Next, please.
Ingo, so I know your time limit. But with the needle stick injury, you're very lucky if you know that the patient has Hep B. I think we should always assume with a needle stick injury it is best, whether or not you know the patient.
Because this is what they call Hep B infected or unknown status.
Yeah.
Very important comment, thank you. If you don't know if someone has Hep B, you would usually do the vaccine anyhow. About HIV medication, the post-exposure prophylaxis, this part I don't know about, and one might know more about it, when to do post-exposure prophylaxis for HIV if the status is unknown.
72 hours.
72 hours.
If you go over 72, there's no risk.
But they could test the other patient in the hospital, see if he's got HIV, and then still start with prophylaxis with HIV.
I think you would.
Or would you just go ahead with
take
it?
the risk, you know.
Yeah, so you would go ahead with both.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, the diagnosis of Hep B is a jigsaw puzzle. You see, even the penguin needs to read where to put them. And you don't have to make it that difficult. Let me simplify it. The antibodies are the good guys, the antigens are the evil. One more click, please. And the HBV DNA, we've had that, is also evil. One basic rule, angels and devils.
You succeeded with your memory things.
The devils are the antigens. People always get confused between antigens and antibodies. So I keep, on the phone, I keep getting those confused callers. So I thought, how can you make this simple and easy to recall? So I came up with this very stupid line. Antigens are against you, and antibodies belong to your body. They are yours. They are your defense. So these are the most important ones. HBs antigen, HB antigen, the one in brackets, you can mostly ignore. It doesn't matter for blood tests or diagnosis. You can only see that in the liver cells. And the angels, the antibodies, are the ones that are targeted against bad guys. Next click, please. They react against them and try to bind to them and make them unable to move and destroy them. Next, please. Some important blood marker. We can skip that. I will not read all of this out to you because we have a more simple explanation. I'll leave you time to photograph it if you want. But you will get the presentation too.
I'm good.
This is very good.
Okay, next please. So, devil number one. Next click, please. If this is there, you know the person has hepatitis B. This is the first marker you look for when you want to know if someone has Hep B. It's a protein that belongs to the surface of the virus. And it takes a while to become positive, 2 to 6 months. So if you want to know right after the infection, there's nothing really reliable to test if you have been infected, yes or no. And again, for vaccines, this is the part that they recreate. This is the part that they show to the immune system. It's like, look, this is what a virus looks like. It's like training a bloodhound, giving him a straw puppet of what the real enemy looks like. See, yes, eat it, and the bloodhound goes like, argh. And if the real virus ever appears, your immune system will say, wait a minute, I know this one. Bam, and destroys it instantly. Next one, please. This is the nice counterpart to it. Next. And this one is created by the immune system. Again, antibodies belong to the body. And when you got those, you can throw a party. It's like, congratulations, it's the best marker you could have. It's the one you want to have when you get vaccinated. And it's the one you crave to have when you are infected with Hep B. Because when these guys appear, the Hep B virus has lost the game. It's game over for Hep B. And it's a sign of immunity after successful vaccination. Next, please. Now, let's see how much attention you paid. We'll do a little quiz. This is a room, and we lock the good guy and the bad guy into the same room and say, fight. Who is going to win? And what does it mean? So, who wins? Who thinks the antibody will win? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who thinks the bad guy will win? The antigen. You still? This, what, 2, 3, and the other ones think, what do you think? No one will?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, for those who are a bit unsure, next click. I'll give you a visual hint. Who will win? Any more guesses?
Now the anti-AB.
Next click.
Antibodies.
Good. Now it's definitely clear. The good guy wins. Anti-HBs is a virus killer. You send them in, the virus is gone. It's lost. And that usually means cure. Again, cure as far as it gets with Hep B, mild activation, mild chemo. The next bit, please. The battle between those two things, that decides about cure or not cure. But there are other, like, theaters of war that are not just as important, but they still matter, where the virus has antigens and the body tries to send in some specialists to destroy them. And the success is mixed. Some of this is still valuable, some of it doesn't tell you much. Next, please. This is the next one. It's not as dark red as the main bad guy, because I think it's not that important. But this is the one that's usually there in new infection, with the so-called wild-type virus. Wild doesn't mean the virus is wild. It just means it's not mutated. It's like the original thing as you find it out in the wilderness. And usually, this one, if you have this HBe antigen, the virus is replicating like this. If you know someone has HBe antigen, and you ask them for the HBV DNA, it's usually sky high. The viral load is usually very, very high because of this envelope antigen. So it's a bad guy, but it's also a vulnerable bad guy. Because even if the immune system cannot cure you, it might manage to destroy this part of the virus, to get some kind of control. Next, please. And this is what the immune system uses. Again, the counterpart, the antibody that belongs to the body. Next, please. And that destroys this motor of the virus. It's like throwing in some piece of metal into the motor, and the motor goes from and suddenly the viral production is down like this. And there are hardly any viruses, and there's a kind of immune control for many years. You still have the virus, but it's under control. It's like a virus in prison or a virus in chains. It's also, this might turn up if you clear a virus, but it doesn't decide about the other one. The anti-HBs, that's the one that decides whether you're cured or not. Next, please.
So if a person is anti-HBe positive, that means that is chronic, can be patient.
Probably for some longer time. And you still you cannot be sure how nice or how aggressive the virus is. But we'll get to that in a minute too. We have the next quiz question. We put them in a room. The good guy and the bad guy. The antibody and the antigen. Now it's not the main war, but who wins?
Well, that's a question of control, as you said.
Still, but who wins and what does it mean? That's the question of, good.
He wins, but only to keep control. He doesn't win to exterminate.
Anybody else? Everybody agree with Torbe? I see some nods. Everybody agree?
Yes.
Yes.
Well done. So the visual hint is not necessary anymore. Next, please. So, again, the good guy wins. But, you see this empty space here? It's not that empty. Next, please. The virus itself is still there. The HBs antigen, it's not gone. The HBV DNA may be very low, but it's still there. Next, please. And next. and it can become active again years later. Next, please. So this part is only like a partial victory. It can give you a peace of mind for many years, but sometimes after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, the virus learns to replicate again, even without that motor. And then you call it pre-core mutant or HBe antigen negative hepatitis B. So if you ever hear this confusing thing, that's the one. That's the mutated virus that has learned to replicate again. Next, please. This one, at first I totally underestimated this one. But I think this is one of the most interesting markers in HB. I call it the quiet observer because, next click please, it's directed against the core of the virus, and it doesn't matter if you clear the infection or not, it always becomes positive, and you always keep it for life. No matter what happens, if you're 90 years old and had an infection when you were 3 years old, this is the marker that can still tell you this human body knows what a real virus looks like. It does not tell you how successfully you can deal with the infection, so that alone only tells you there's been contact, there's been a real virus, not a vaccine. You don't get that with a vaccine. And this is why I think this marker is really, really interesting, and we'll get to that in a minute. Next, please. Now, here comes the trick question. Next, please. If you lock anti-HPC and the HBs antigen into the same room, who wins and what does that mean?
Bad guy.
Who wins? Bad guy? Bad guy?
Bad guy.
Any more takers? No one? Okay. I told you it's a trick question. You can't tell. Because, as I said, it just tells you there's been a real infection. It doesn't tell you whether it clears or not. So, next click please. The bad guy doesn't mind. Other antibodies. Anti-HBs, that's the one that decides the battle for you. This one just tells you there's been contact with a real virus. I still think this is a very precious marker for some reasons that we get to next. Is someone infected, or is he cured, or is he vaccinated, or is he healthy? And you need 3 markers to find out. Next click. That's the bad guys, the main antigen. That's the good guys that clear the infection. And that's the little quiet observer that tells you if there's been a real contact or not. This is really valuable sometimes, if you want to know where you're at. Again, angels and devils. 3. These are the questions connected to that. These are the 3 markers you want to ask a patient. If he's on the phone and says, I have hepatitis B, please help me. You try to see if they have their lab markers, and you ask for the HBs antigen. That's the question, like, is the virus really there? If they have that, if it's positive, yes, it's there. Anti-HBs, that's the opposite. Is the guy immune or cured? Because if anti-HBs appear, the HBs antigen is usually gone. There are some overlaps, obviously, because they need to fight for a while, but usually this one is the only.
Either one or the other.
Yes, usually it's either one or the other. And anti-HPC is the one that tells you, has this human being ever been in touch with a real virus? And now let's get straight into the examples. This is an infected patient. And now I think you see how this makes sense. Of course the virus is there, positive. Of course the patient is not immune, is not cured because he's infected. And this makes sense too, doesn't it? It just says there has been contact with the virus. In this case, you probably don't need it because you know the virus is there. Well, of course there has been contact. No. But sometimes there are constellations where this one becomes really interesting. Next, please. This is a cured patient. The bad guy is gone. This is the immunity. The good guys won the war. And this one shows you this was not a vaccination. This was a real infection. This guy has seen a real virus. Next. This one is a bit tricky. Sometimes you only have that. And that's usually people who have been cured a long, long time ago. And
But
I
not
believe-
vaccinated.
Not vaccinated. No, this is clearly a marker that there has been an infection a long time ago. They're probably still immune, even though you can't see the protection anymore. Probably their specialist soldiers are still like waiting in their houses to storm out if there was a new virus. But it's been such a long time ago that this thing went down. But I would expect if someone gets a new infection that the antibodies then go out like that and quickly clear the virus. This is a healthy vaccinated patient. You see, only immunity, but no sign of contact. And that's the big difference. This is the one that tells you you might reactivate later, but you don't have that. This just tells you you are protected. You don't have the virus, and you will probably never have it. And the last one, well, that explains itself. Someone who's healthy and never vaccinated, of course, there are no markers at all.
And if someone is anti-HBE positive
Yes.
with this situation, what that means? Does it ever appear?
This perfectly fits the situation.
Okay.
It's not as important for the first markers to ask for, but usually I would expect that to be there too, anti-HBE.
Okay, so that means that
Well-
the person does not have,
Exactly. That's just another
but was
antigen
in
that they
contact,
destroy.
but he
Yes.
was in contact with virus, and his body
Yes.
won. I mean,
Yes.
good
but
guys
the-
won the battle.
But the anti-HBE really doesn't matter that much more for the question. Just, you do have anti-HBE antibodies, they must be positive, aren't they? Yeah, they are. Okay. So, or they're not, or nothing is there.
I mean, that doesn't mean
But that's
that,
just a side arena.
okay, that doesn't mean that the patient is a chronic HB patient.
No, because if he has this immunity and not the main virus, this one really decides if someone has the virus or not.
Okay.
Usually, if this is negative, there are
Do
some
we have here slides which explain how this looks in a chronic hepatitis B patient?
Let's go back a few steps. This one could
Chronic?
be both acute or chronic.
Okay.
If you want to find out if someone's
But-
chronic
but-
or not,
but-
it's usually, you know that they have it long term.
Yeah.
It's not so clear with the lab markers. This lab marker might look a bit different in a fresh infection. There might be a different ending. It might be anti-APC IgM. That's more like for the new infections. But usually it's just the long-term. Usually, you know someone is chronic because you first tested him positive half a year ago and he still has it. And you see some liver damage. That's how you usually know.
But if seroconversion I mean, if someone is
You mean the
antigen
real-
negative,
This one negative.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and anti-HBS positive, and
Yes.
anti-HBC positive and anti-HBE positive, what that means?
Yeah.
The same as the next slide. Go ahead. Again, as I told you, you can have some markers on top of this, but they don't change the message.
So this is not a chronic patient.
This is a cured patient
This is a cure.
because the bad guy is gone. So, and now, why is this so important? The three markers. Let's not get confused about the E antigen anymore, but just let's use the three markers. You have a patient on your hotline, and these are the kind of patients you will get. Some with a fresh infection, some with a chronic infection, some who are healthy but are afraid of just having been infected, healthy vaccinated persons. These two are something to watch out for. Not everyone who phones you and says, help, I have Hep B, really has Hep B. They get their antibodies mixed up. Healthy vaccinated patients who believe they are infected, and cured patients who believe they are still infected. And now let's get straight into an example call, and we will just pretend you are on the helpline now, please. So the caller says, I have hepatitis B, please help me. And the advisor at first checks in with him. It's like, do I get you right? Your doctor said you have hepatitis B, just to make sure. And your HBs antigen is positive. And suddenly the caller stops and, oh, I'm not that sure about that. And then he asks, like, well, do you have your lab results with you? And could you read them to me? And usually people are very surprised if you offer that to them. They're like, oh, I don't have them. Wait, I need to get them. You hear paper rustling, and then they read something out to you, and this is what you get. Anti-HBs positive, he says. So what should the patient advisor say next? Should he say, you're right, this clearly is hepatitis B, or B, you were infected but cleared the virus, or C, you have been vaccinated, this is not an infection, or D, anti-HBs, are you sure? Then you would either be cured or vaccinated. Please read on it. Does it have any more test results?
D.
D? D? Anybody? Any other choices? Or anybody takes D? Why? This is good. Why?
Because of the previous slide. Because yes, because if anti-HBC is positive plus this one, that means that it is the patient who like me. Yeah.
You just made me so happy.
Yes.
Next, please.
But I'm still not sure regarding E antigen. Okay.
Don't get confused about that.
Okay.
Remember,
Okay.
for the first impression, just these.
Okay.
Don't even ask for E.
Yeah. That's.
Yeah. D is the right answer for exactly the reasons you just described. You cannot tell yet. This is definitely wrong. He cannot have the virus if he has immunity and protection. This may be true, but you don't know. This also may be true, but you don't know yet. You need to have more information. So next, please. So you asked him this question, and the caller keeps reading. Anti-HBs positive, HBs antigens negative, and oh, hang on, anti-HBC. And he says, and he's like, but that's for Hep C. Be prepared for that. People get confused about that all the time. It's like, no. It's really for hepatitis B. It means hepatitis B core. You can explain that to them. And then people are like, oh, because people keep getting confused about that. So
it's easy if you speak English, but if you speak Croatian, it's not, because C in their mind is C hepatitis. C in Croatian we don't say.
We don't have core.
C. I understand. I usually ask, is that a big, the big one or the little? I usually ask that.
Yeah, I usually say in Germany we don't call core. We say kern. And I tell them, this is against the kern of the virus. And in English the word phrase is core with C. This is what it says. And so he tells you this anti-HBC is negative. And you're checking in again, because sometimes people read their results wrong on the phone. Be prepared for that. So he has them read it all again, and it's really true. Next slide, please. Anti-HBs positive, all other markers negative. What's the caller situation? Any takers? Is it A? Oh, then you do have hepatitis B.
No.
Is it B? You were infected but cleared the virus. Congratulations.
No.
Or is it C? You likely have been vaccinated against hepatitis B in the past. Do you remember any such vaccination? Or D? No idea what this is, but you ask the doctor. Well, I mean, if you're not sure, take D.
Yeah.
In case of doubt, or you call the patient something wrong, but you're not allowed to take D now.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to decide on something. So who is taking A? Any takers? No. Thank you. Who's taking B? No one. Who's taking C?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, please. Well done. You're doing much better than the group I had the last time in Germany. They were like spurting.
I can't see no sign of infection. Yeah.
No sign of infection, only immunity. Now, let's take exactly the same call, but with a slightly different result. Next slide, please.
Very likely that is our man.
The same conversation as before. The caller says, I have hepatitis B, please help me. The advisor asks, what are your enzymes? And this is what he gets out of this. Anti-HBC positive, anti-HBS positive. What can the advisor say next? Yes, this clearly is a hepatitis B. Or, I hear a lot of no's. Thank you. Good.
B.
B, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Why?
Because of anti-HBC positive.
Yes. What does that say?
Pale angel who says, oh, that's that observer, quiet observer, who remembers once upon a time this body was in contact with red devil. Yeah.
Yes.
May I be your
Thank
assistant?
you. You are doing so well. I'm really happy. I'm really happy. So yes, that's the thing. Click, please. This is too easy for you. I need to come up with
No,
some
but
tricky
it's
questions
not.
next
But
time.
you know, it's easy when you have it like this.
In this way, yes.
But
That's
in 3 weeks, with my memory, if you then call me up and say, then I will have
In 3 weeks
forgotten
you will have
everything.
PowerPoint
So
presentation.
you will have this for presentation and print out the slides,
very nice.
which
Very
will help you.
I really need it. I really need it.
I
This is
need
the
it
first time
too.
I see something as clear as this.
Isn't it great?
I need it too. It's very great.
And I can also
So will
give
you
you
send
a
it to
quick,
us?
yes, and I can also give you a quick sheet,
Yeah.
like 2 pages overview. What's the constellation? Cured, immune.
Very nice. Very nice.
So next slide, please. So this one has really cured hepatitis B, and you see this is a bit, quite a lot of text, more than in the other ones. This is just the message that I told you about earlier, like consider yourself cured, but never forget you had it because of that problem with reactivating immune suppression. And really explain patients that the immune system needs to be severely compromised. Not this thing like, oh my God, I have a weak immune system because I keep getting colds. No. It's really just very heavy impact things.
And also I would add to warn your your patient who cured,
Yes.
who cured, to warn their doctors.
Like
to
I
warn
once
their
had
doctors.
hepatitis
Yes.
B.
Once I
Please
had
check my
hepatitis.
lab markers
Yes.
if I need
Yes.
some prophylaxis, yes or no.
Yes.
But
Yes.
please look into it before you start the chemo.
Yeah, exactly. To be
Yes,
aware, if they
that's-
know they have to
that's-
make a chemo, that they are
Yes.
aware.
If you don't say nothing,
Because it's
you know,
really-
sometimes
if you-
even doctors forget to ask you.
Exactly.
If you need protection, it's just one little extra pill that can make the difference between life and death.
Yeah, exactly.
Next, please. Another type of call we often get. This is without a quiz question because this is a clear-cut case. The doctor says the patient really has Hep B. The patient has known for 3 years, so it's definitely chronic, and the HBS antigen is positive. And you see, this caller is also already quite well informed. He knows instantly, like HBS antigen, of course, yeah, I have it. And this person needs a whole different conversation. Next, please. And there, of course, first you just checking what the caller wants to know, and they will just ask. And there are some additional questions you can ask. Are they taking treatment now? If they are, what are they taking, and does it work? Does the virus go down? Do the liver enzymes go down? And if there's no treatment, does the doctor recommend to stop treatment? Or does he recommend to wait, which may be a better idea in some patients? And was the liver checked for any damage, like cirrhosis? Do they know their viral load? Again, you will have many people who say, HBV what? This is the most important marker they need to look out for. Really drive that home with them. The HBS antigen. Once they know it, they usually can ignore it for a long, long time. But the HBV DNA, this is the one they really want to keep their eye on. And this one, word try to think. And when word tries, PowerPoint try to think for me, it should be HBE, not habe. It keeps falsely correcting something into German words that make no sense. HBe antigen positive or negative, and liver enzymes, are they normal, as they should be, or are they high?
Would you say that the liver enzymes, are they more important in B than in C, or the contrary?
Then slightly more important for the treatment decision, I would
For
say.
the B?
For the treatment decision.
For the treatment.
Yes.
Either for B or
Okay,
C.
yes.
More
yes.
important for the
Yeah.
treatment decision.
Okay.
They are not the only thing that decides about it, but they play a higher role, because in Hep C, you also, by now, you don't look so much at the liver enzymes anymore as you used to. It
Yeah.
used to be different.
That's
We don't treat you if you don't have high enzymes in Hep C, but they have been
They don't-
rethinking
yeah, I
that.
know, I know.
There's also people with Hep B, chronic,
Exactly.
with normal liver enzymes, with normal liver enzymes who still get liver damage. So it's not a guarantee, but it's a more important marker for deciding does he need treatment, yes or no.
Yes.
Next, please. Treat now or watch and wait. This really depends on every single case, and it's difficult for a patient advisor to say you should or you shouldn't. And there's a risk. Some can have serious consequences after only 5 years, some after 50 years. I just met a joyful lady of 70 who's probably been born with it and has no liver damage at all. That also happens. She's just an HBs antigen carrier and has been all the time and never became active. She's really lucky. But specialist doctors should really look at the virus, because a virus that's peaceful now is not necessarily peaceful in half a year from now, or in a year, or in 5 years. So you need to keep watching it. You need to keep watching it, because if it becomes more active, then you should consider treatment, and then it's peaceful again. If the disease takes an aggressive course, you cannot cure it, but you can turn it into mild disease again. So you can turn a very bad hepatitis B into a nice hepatitis B. Next.
Hepatitis B is never nice.
No, but nice
But
means
nicer.
like peaceful.
I would say
peaceful.
nice, yeah, more peaceful or nicer. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes. Let's say peaceful. Again, 1, 2, 3. 3 factors, 3 main factors how doctors decide if they should treat you. And that's the viral load. That really matters for the treatment decision. Not always on its own, but it's a very important thing. The liver enzymes, if they are high and the viral load is high, that's usually enough to know this patient needs something. And if you don't know, or if you want to know what the liver looks like, you can do a liver biopsy. And the more signs there are, the more likely it is to treat. Here you see it's a winding road. Hep B treatment is not the same for every person. And there are complex guidelines. I recommend Europe the EASL guidelines to look into those. Who should get treated with which drug? And again, be careful with recommendations, because unless you know all the drugs like the back of your hand, you might get confused between that. And here's one thing. In Hep C, the patient may wish to be cured and try it, understandably. In Hep B, if a patient wants treatment and is really impatient to get it, that wish alone should not be enough for the decision, because you can even harm a patient if you treat at the wrong time. They usually have exaggerated expectations. They are like, I have hepatitis B and my doctor is so bad, he doesn't want to cure me. He should just give me a few pills and then I could be cured, but he doesn't like me, so he doesn't want to cure me. You will get those patients.
That's very
more than
common.
once for everyone. And patients should always ask, like, if they need treatment, and they should trust the doctor, and if they don't trust, they should, well, get a second opinion. But if the second doctor also says, no, you don't need it, they should start believing their doctors. And which drugs may work best or not also depends on the patient. And when to adapt the treatment, like efficacy, resistance, and side effects, also depends on how it goes. Next, please. Again, we saw that list. It's either pegcetacoplan or these drugs. Change it. This is more complex. When can you ever stop if you take pills? That really depends on how the treatment goes and what type of Hep B you have. And
That
here
would
the
be my
HB
first
antigen.
question if I had it.
Yeah. Here the HB antigen is one of the things that still matters. Because if you have this original wild type, and the treatment manages to get this kind of control over it, then you don't stop instantly, because otherwise it's not stable enough. Usually the antigen comes back. But if you treat for 6 to 12 months longer, and the doctor keeps looking at it, how your viral load is doing and everything, so it's not just that longer, you may consider stopping if your doctor advises you to do so. If your virus has learned to walk without this antigen and you start with pills, you're on them, possibly for life. Unless you have one of these very rare cures where the virus gets into these cure-like states that are really, really rare. And if someone has cirrhosis, many doctors are cautious and just want to keep them in treatment just to make really sure. But if you want like a clear-cut official rules, again, easy guidelines, check them out. And a little warning, when you're on it and you stop too early, the virus can become very active again and the disease can get very bad. It's not like hep C that it's like, oh dear, I still have it. In hepatitis B, it's like, oh dear, it's active again and it's really damaging me. Next, please. Now, the big question, will we get a cure of hepatitis B one day? It's impossible to predict. We don't know. They are looking into things. Again, this is the cure-like state where you have this HBs antigen and the good antibodies. This is as close as we get to a cure today. And this is great. This is usually that the virus doesn't cause you any more trouble. But you keep a slightly higher cancer risk still, even if you clear the virus as much. Scientists are looking for treatment that achieves this more often. I think they are looking into different interference. PEG interferon lambda is being investigated for Hep B. Whether it works or not, I don't know. It will take years until we know it in trials. They have some more experimental substances which have just been tested in tiny groups of patients that seem to achieve more seroconversions, but they also seem to have delivered. So it's really controversial if these things are going to work, and there's really very, very little data on that. So people are looking to new things. I think maybe in 10 years' time, chronic hepatitis B will be an entirely different matter. Maybe they will have something, a completely new approach that doesn't just lower the viral load. I think it's possible, but right now it's impossible to tell which approach will work. But people are working in the labs, they are looking for it. And the industry is also, some of them are quite interested. Of course, some of them are interested in keeping their drugs going. But just imagine a company comes up with a cure for Hep B. They would own the market. Everyone would want to have that. This is the problem with CCCBA. It always stays behind, even in cures. And if we could get rid of this, then we would really have a cure. Next. This is just one slide dedicated to a small little virus that's very underestimated, very unknown. In Germany, more people die from this one than from HIV. I call it piggyback monster because it needs to sit on the B virus to even work, but then it's really bad. And it's especially bad if you first have chronic hepatitis B and then it comes later and sits on top of it. That's called a superinfection. That can be especially aggressive. And blood is the main route of infection. It's difficult to treat. All the tablets for Hep B, you take them on their own, they don't do anything. Interferon seems to work nicely. The Delta virus goes down like this, you stop the interferon treatment and it's back up, usually. But there was one trial where they combined adefovir and interferon where they cured 1/4 of the trial. Small trial, but still there is some hope, and they are looking for more combinations in the future. The good thing, if you are vaccinated and healthy, you don't have Hep B, you cannot get this Delta virus either, because without this one cannot move. Next, please. The last chapter of my presentation is, are there any dietary restrictions? Is there a Hep B diet? The short answer is this. Don't drink alcohol, but apart from that, I'm sorry. As you will see in the next slide, you will see why I'm sorry. Apart from that, enjoy your meal. The somewhat longer answer is, sorry Tatiana, you see, for some people this is also a kind of diet, and this is something you also shouldn't do.
I mean, without alcohol.
Still bad for the liver. So it's also not as
told
well
you.
explored. It's in other diseases like diabetes, you've got all those diet plans and everything. In chronic liver disease and Hep B, you don't have them. You usually say, eat what you can tolerate, eat what you like, eat healthily, so a big yes here. And restrictions of the diet are usually only necessary if you have really advanced cirrhosis with complications, but that's a different subject that I won't get into. Coffee is allowed if you like it and if you tolerate it, and it might even be beneficial. Next, there have been some astounding data on coffee. Do you remember the times when they said, oh, you have a liver disease, you shouldn't drink coffee, it's bad for your health? By now we know people who cheerfully ignored it and drank coffee are the ones who lived longer.
Maybe with tea it would be the same.
No, they tested that and they die earlier. Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
But this coffee story is...
This coffee story is amazing. At first I didn't believe it, but by now there are so many trials with thousands of patients and they have not been sponsored by the coffee industry, so I really believe them. And I just have two
Green
examples
tea
here.
has no effect for all the preachers.
Really, yes. Look at this trial. How cool is that? In Asia, they made a controlled trial where they compared green tea with coffee. I really like that
I'm
idea.
sure they did not expect this result.
No.
I don't think so either.
Oh,
I
is
think
it?
so. Green tea is so
Everybody
healthy.
thinks that green tea is so good for the
Blah, blah,
liver.
blah. Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Yeah,
Shall we go on?
it's amazing.
I'm sure it
And
is.
now we're getting to the conclusion.
Okay, oh, thank you. Oh dear.
Oh wow, that wasn't it? It was a lot of information. So the most important take-home message is about Hep B. It's more infectious than C. There's a vaccine against it. Free markers tell you what kind of patient you have, mostly. And the new hepatitis B usually goes away on its own in adults, and they are immune against Hep B for life. But it may come back if the immune system is really compromised. There's not yet a cure if it's chronic. Drugs can control the infection and prevent liver damage, and the treatment decision really depends on each patient, like liver enzymes, HBV DNA, maybe a biopsy, some other markers that a doctor can tell you about. And the last thing,
Maybe you should write in on the last point, you should say, avoid alcohol and cigarettes. So you get it.
Because nicotine.
alcohol, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
okay.
healthy and
You
coffee
just-
is allowed.
yeah.
And with that,
And
One
when
more tip,
we
please.
say coffee, that means caffeine. So
Coffee with
no
caffeine.
this cafe.
probably yes,
yeah.
but caffeine alone doesn't do it. If you drink Red Bull, I don't think it helps the
Okay,
liver.
okay.
So the goodbye slide. Thank you very much and enjoy your coffee.